Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my next interview are with the new chairs of the Human Rights Watch's festival, which is happening in, it's happening in a very few days, February 18th to the 22nd, 2021. It's the 18th annual Human Rights Watch Film Festival. Jennifer Batewell and Nick DePonsier are here to talk about that. We talk a little bit about their film making as well, and we get into some philosophy and we talk about production and storytelling and a whole lot more. But I did want to just say that this year, across Canada, the festival is free through Hot Docs, so you can get there. Just search Hot Docs online, and you will find out more about the Human Rights Watch Festival. Opening night, A La Calle is a film coming out of Venezuela. I mean, these are films about ordinary people doing extraordinary things and pushing back in interesting ways and recording those stories for others to hear. I Am Samuel, coming out of Kenya, looking at laws and LGBTQ issues and gender disparity and so on. Wake Up on Mars, Albanian Swedish film, and something called Resignation Syndrome. You're going to want to learn a little bit more about that. I mean, just even spending a little bit of time on the website, you'll go deeper and look at reading a little bit more about what some of these films are about. Maxima, an environmental film and an important film, a story that you're going to want to hear more about, and also Love Child, a film about relationships and about so much more. So head to the website, check it out, and dig a little deeper. And what's really amazing and fascinating all at the same time is the films are free this year. So my two guests today on Face to Face, what a pleasure to have them. Celebrated Canadian filmmakers, Anthropocene. In fact, they were heading off to a Q&A. I could have talked to them all afternoon without a doubt. Mercury Films is their company, and head to their site if you get a second, especially if you're a Canadian filmmaker or a filmmaker of any kind. Their subjects, quote, are skewed to art and philosophy, and they're all about extending boundaries, and I really think that is a beautiful thing. Manufactured Landscapes, long time running, Act of God. There's some really some brilliant stories that Jennifer and Nick have told over the last many years, and you're going to want to learn more about them. And so I think that's why it's so important that they're a part of the festival this year. They're acting as chairs, and I was just so thrilled to chat with them about human rights issues and again, why this kind of storytelling is so important. These folks who are telling these stories are putting their lives in some cases on the line. We talked about the human condition and about framing and about text and visual languages and how film is so time-based. We talked about something called the ethics of engagement, and that's not only for the documentarian, but that's for us, the audience member as well. We talked about how some of us are more implicated than others, a phrase that Jennifer came out with, which I think is wonderful and maybe rooted in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. I hope if you're listening, Jennifer, you're smiling. We talked about the power of journalism and how craft and art come together, and about traditional senses of community, and about how that these films, as Nick says, that are getting made. These are like minor miracles and multiplicity of forms, and how this is about changing the way people see the world, and about how craft and art are coming together, and these conduits for truth, and how inequities and the gap is being revealed in a really unique, interesting, and compelling way. So much more going on there than meets the eye. I can't wait for part 2 with them. I can't wait for the festival. Looking forward to it, and I've certainly heard of some of these films. Looking forward to seeing them. So once again, opening night, and all of these are going to be followed by Q&As. And I know I've hosted some of these things down in the past, and they're community events where you've got people online, and it's the closest we can get to that theatrical experience right now with others chatting about things that matter. But A La Calle, I Am Samuel, Wake Up on Mars, Love Child, and Maxima. Check it out on the Hot Docs website. Don't miss out. And if you are liking what we're doing here on Face to Face, please, give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Subscribe there. We need more YouTube subscribers. Also, leave us a review on iTunes. I could really appreciate that, and socially mediate the heck out of us if you can. Tweet and retweet and like and post, and hopefully you're going to be hearing more about what we're doing here on Face to Face. But stay tuned. Coming right up, not only the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, February 18th to 22nd, but also a fascinating, engaging, fun interview with Jennifer Batewell and Nick Depensier coming right up. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by two very special guests here with us today. We have Jennifer Batewell and Nick Depensier here. We're here to talk about a lot of things, but I think we're here really to talk about the Human Rights Watch Film Festival coming up February 18th to the 22nd in Toronto at Hot Docs. We'll talk more about how you can find tickets and all of that. But I just wanted to say I'm excited to have you guys on Face to Face today here with me to talk storytelling and narrative and film and the festival. So thank you for taking the time.
Very happy to be here. Thanks, David.
Hey, before we get into the festival, Nick, maybe you can tell us about this Q&A that you're going to be rushing off to shortly, about one of your many films that you guys have worked on, Anthropocene. I'm sure a few others are going to come up, but you guys are pretty celebrated filmmakers. Tell us a little bit about what's coming up for you guys later on this afternoon.
Yeah, we're really honored that Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, is being screened in Chile for the first time, and it's organized through the Canadian Embassy there. It's a reprisal of a screening that was supposed to happen in person and was supposed to have some of the art exhibit perhaps go with it, that was scheduled for more than a year ago, and was postponed because of the civil unrest in Chile first, and then because of the pandemic. And so just like so many things in the COVID paradigm, we have found a virtual way to finally have this film reach an audience in Chile. And so to try and draw attention to it, we're doing a panel discussion afterwards.
Oh, that's amazing, and congratulations. And I mean, isn't that sort of one of the dreams of a filmmaker, to see the life of a film continue on and to go a little deeper and to go a little wider and deeper, I suppose, could be a log line for a filmmaker, I suppose.
Especially in not just in the global north. I mean, we've had tons of screenings in Europe and North America, and that's why we really wanted to go to Chile, because when we say in the Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, that some of us are more implicated than others in the environmental impacts that humans have as a species, that really is people in North America and Europe primarily, I would say, and it's often places in the global south that feel the impact of that way more. So anyway, it's great that it's being shown there, and we're looking forward to having a lively discussion.
Yeah, I bet, and I wish you well with that. I love your phrase about how some of us are more implicated than others. I've been studying philosophy all my life, and before I step into that, I hope you guys don't mind if I read a quote off your film, off your website. So you both founders of Mercury Films, they've been making, folks, to my listeners, award-winning, critically acclaimed documentaries and films for 2 decades. Their subjects are eclectic, skewed to art and philosophy, and try to extend formal boundaries without being inaccessible. I so love that about what you're doing with your storytelling. Anthropocene, clearly a film about the environment, but also very much a human rights issue. Either of you, can you step in and unpack this extending of the boundaries, connect it to maybe this is a conversation about the Human Rights Watch Festival coming up, and we'll talk about the 5 films, I'm sure. But I'd love to know a little bit more about how you've done that. Maybe more importantly, why did you decide to, philosophy and art and extending boundaries? Why was that? Why did that matter?
Come on, Nick. You want me to do it?
Jen, the word philosophy is in there. I'm going to pass you the baton on this.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Well, so my background is in philosophy and religious studies. I did a master's at McGill University, and I was always, fascinated by questions of the human condition. Epistemology and metaphysics and ethics and I was going to become an academic. I mean, I was on that road, and I sort of got discouraged by and impatient with the limitations of the form of inquiry, because
Interesting.
Academic life is very specific,
Yep.
and I knew that my who at least three people would read my thesis: me,
Right.
my advisor, and the outside reader who had to
Of
evaluate
course,
it.
yes.
And so I kind of thought, is there a form that is more lateral and accessible to people that can still explore those questions? And I turned to film as somebody who had no training. I didn't go to film school. I learned by, making my first documentary. And I was immediately kind of captivated by the possibilities of putting, for a better word, text, information and visual language together in time. Film is a time-based medium, and the possibilities of that, and that's how I started. And I would say, when we say extending formal boundaries without being inaccessible, a lot of traditional documentary or journalistic documentary film, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that genre of documentary. And in fact, many of the films in the festival are take that
Sure.
as their form. But for me, the subordinate nature of visual language that is often, sometimes in more, I would say, more traditional news media, not journalism, was I was frustrated by that, and I thought, is there a way of bringing these two things together so that film is a visual medium, so that the visual language is as important as what you are learning in terms of information, and also informs what you are learning. And then the other part of that is that the ethics of engagement are hugely important, because it's already an aggressive act to put a camera in somebody's face. And then
Sure.
when you do it, when you go all over the world, as we do, if you do not do so with humility and openness, you'll
That's
never
good.
be able to convey anything true about that place. And so that came to me from those studies. And Nick, also an autodidact who learned himself, learned how to operate a camera, learned how to do, all of the budget work, the producing work, and beyond camera now, in terms of the other augmented reality and 360 virtual reality, that the things that we did for Anthropocene. We just gelled together in this endeavor, and then became partners in work and life, and have been making films together for over 20 years.
Nick, so Jennifer, thank you. So many questions. And by the way, I really want to know what the metaphysical implications of getting struck by lightning are. I really do need to hear the deeper work on that. Like, that's just wonderful stuff. Terrence Malick, Heideggerian scholar, right? Also, I think, from what I understand, deeply frustrated with the academic community and not being able to, those three people, are they going to go and change the world? Right. Yeah. So, I love what you've had to say. So many things and so many places we could go with that. But Nick, the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, very specific form of, I suppose, storytelling. Do you think that documentary has that ability to change the world in a way that a narrative, say, film doesn't? So I watched a film recently with Palmer, with Justin Timberlake, and directed by Fisher Stevens, about gender issues, and very understated, very entertaining, very, I guess you could say, Hollywood. I hope Fisher's okay with that. But I just wonder, does that have a different impact because it's working on some other layer over and above, say, a doc that's very informative, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think, sort of could touch on what Jennifer was just saying as well, it seems to me.
I would hope that there's room in the medium for such a multiplicity of approaches and forums. And I think if you track the success of fiction film over the last while, a lot of more issues-oriented films have really risen to the fore. Films that are sometimes based on true stories, or at least set in real-life contemporary situations. And even strong allegorical films, I think, can absolutely educate and inspire and galvanize people in their thoughts and their apprehension of their surroundings. And then I think if you look at the wide range of practice in documentary, it's liberating. And one of the reasons certainly why I've gravitated to it is that it has this foot rooted in the power of journalism and the power of the real, and that you're invariably interpreting the real. But you can also apply a lot of craft and art and filmmaking language to that real as appropriate, and hopefully not gratuitously, but borrow from a lot of the power of the cinematic medium, which I think is the medium of our age. It's the distillation of all these other media in this power pack moment, and the product of hours and hours of filming and editing and color correcting and music. So it's this really powerful moment, this distillation, and it's a time capsule, so that we can be sitting in a pandemic lockdown in our TV room in Canada, and we can really have a visceral sense of an issue that might be happening in Venezuela, that might be happening in Africa, that might be somebody else's daily reality, far removed from ours, or a large geopolitical issue, and we might really come to understand that in a way that other media might not, in a way that tweets and news stories and the churn of daily journalism might not. And I think there's a real power in that, and especially in this current situation.
Can movies change the world? I mean, it's a kind of, on one level, it's a very simple question, but I think it's pretty layered as well. And I'd love to hear both of you on that, because you guys have made some pretty important films over the years, and now representing what I would call a pretty important and relevant film festival. I don't know if we had a better time right now, for the Human Rights Watch Festival to be front and center with what's going on around the world.
Well, and also, I mean, the wonderful thing about, we all love to be in a theater packed together and then talking to people who leave the theater and arguing about films and stuff. But, this digital festival this year, everybody across Canada can watch it, and it's free.
Right.
So the traditional sort of sense of community that we've had, like, or the idea of being in a theater with other people, has expanded, I think, to something that is even greater as community. As Nick says, we can be sitting, I'm looking at a snowstorm right now, and yet, we're in the Peruvian highlands with Maxima, watching her fight mining corporations to keep her land. And so, and empathizing with her. So I absolutely believe that film has that capacity to change the world. But I also think that, and I don't mean to go too heavy on the philosophy here, but like I was sort of a Kantian in school, in the sense that I loved the idealism of Kant, the idea that there was a possibility of a categorical imperative or a universal. Even though I think that that's a very difficult thing to define, given contextual realities, but film has to be the thing in itself. It has to have its own intrinsic meaning. Otherwise, it becomes some kind of a form of propaganda in a way. Like, I feel that it has to land and have meaning in itself. And each one of these films in the festival, though they are dealing with really serious human rights abuses, environmental abuses, discrimination, etc., the things that Human Rights Watch as an organization is, so admirably relentless about pursuing, as they say, tyranny has a witness. So all of these films manage to do that. They are their own forms. They're their own works of art in some way, and yet they convey such profound knowledge about these issues that we all need to know about. And they do it in an incredibly moving way, which comes from that they stand up as things in themselves, as works of art. So I feel like film can change the world, but film on its own has meaning in and of itself.
Yeah, it's good. Well, I love too how you talked about turning the sort of the traditional communities kind of on their heads in a way. I just Sundance is starting in a few days, and I'm interviewing a few filmmakers, and I was just online with Ali El Arab, who's directed Captains of Zatari, which is, just this beautiful film. And I said to him, and I got this beautiful smile out of him, isn't it an amazing world, Ali, where we can, connect together? Here you are sitting in Egypt. I'm here just outside of Toronto, and we're having a conversation about a story that I probably would never have heard of 10 years ago. Isn't that a beautiful and a true thing or moment, and something to be celebrated. Nick, what drew you to filmmaking? What was it? So Jennifer's clearly maybe the academic in this relationship. Is that fair to say? And a filmmaker too. I hope that's not a disparaging comment, Jennifer. By the way, what do you think, Nick? Where you're more the producer, the DOP? What's or are you one of these empathy making machines as well?
I am the producer and the director of photography, and I love to be involved in the meta level decision making of the creative process.
Nice meta level. I love it.
But yeah, I also am maybe cursed with the more practical streak as well, and I do enjoy it as long as I'm not stuck in admin drudgery for too long. But as a means to an end, to making films, to telling these stories. I have always loved creative problem solving and practical problem solving. And boy, film is a mile a minute of all kinds of problems that need to be figured out. Logistical, creative, technical, administrative. So yes, that's I think more what I bring to the equation on many of these fronts.
So you're not just talking about the Excel spreadsheet or the sharpened pencil. You're talking about in the moment, something's gone sideways. We can't get out of this portion of the city. We got to get a shot before the sun goes. Like that kind of critical decision making that makes a difference. Clearly,
every film getting made is a minor miracle. And then if you look at something like the slate of 5 films that we have here at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, and the conditions under which a lot of them were made,
of course,
which often get woven into the story, you realize how hard you have to work and what level of dedication you have to have. And I think it's incumbent on the filmmaker always to go to the max, but especially in a situation where you are being trusted with somebody's extremely sensitive story. If it's a story of discrimination, you have subjects that are potentially very vulnerable, and you have an enormous responsibility to tell that story to the best of your ability, and also not to expose those subjects to any further harm. And I think that the success of these 5 films in the Human Rights Watch Film Festival are a real testament to super high level filmmaking. And dedication to that outcome, just like Human Rights Watch itself is known and revered around the world as a rock solid source of absolutely credible information. Their research is without parallel among so many NGOs. They are right on the ground in so many very difficult conflict zones, places that are really hard to work, but where their research is really needed, and their meticulous, nonpartisan documentation is just a bedrock for governments trying to make policies, for other organizations providing aid, for news and journalism to really be able to trust a credible source. So I think there's a real wonderful virtuous circle that the Human Rights Watch chooses a film festival, and different Human Rights Watch offices around the world have this film festival. It kind of travels in varying forms. Sometimes there's overlap in the films every year, but we've been honored enough to have some of our films, like Manufactured Landscapes, chosen to be part of the Human Rights Watch Film Festival circuit. And it's extremely gratifying to be part of that. And I think, in the way that these documentaries are witnessing and are testaments to a really unique, often very volatile situation somewhere in the world, it's a really nice echo of the incredible work that Human Rights Watch itself does.
Okay, I just have to jump in there with two things because I want to bring up something about the
Jennifer. Only two things? I'd be surprised.
Okay, only two things. But no, first of all, Nick's film Black Code played at at tons of Human Rights Watch film festivals, and was very much an example of that, protecting people who you are also trying to tell a story about. And I will say that we have co-directed a number of films together too. And as the cinematographer, Nick is responsible for the visceral interpretation of my, in some cases, egg-headed sort of ideas, and it's not always going that way. We fight a lot in a good way, and I think that we're both absolutely committed, and both there creatively. But the thing I was going to say about what Nick brought up with these researchers, like all of the films in this festival are connected to work that Human Rights Watch is doing all the time.
Right.
So they're doing work in Venezuela. They're doing work with LGBT communities. They're doing work against multinational corporations that are taking advantage of and trampling the rights of Indigenous people. They are doing work with refugees. I mean, the whole thing of resignation syndrome was such a revelation that you could be so traumatized in this experience that you would literally, almost go into a kind of a coma. And I feel that when they vet these films, both for the relevance to Human Rights Watch's work, but also in terms of their accuracy, their truth, they're stringent in that way, and we're really glad about that. So that we get a sort of a slate of films that have already been in some way pre-screened when we are programming, and then we watch them all and have these incredible conversations about what brings something out, and the power of that film on its own as the thing in itself, but also how it relates to the greater work that Human Rights Watch is doing, and how it is a story that people need to, be exposed to and be inspired by. Yeah. So as Nick says, it's a virtuous circle, and we're very, very honored to be part of it now, in this role.
Jennifer, you talked about the ethics of engagement, which is a wonderful phrase. And it seems to me that isn't that the work of an organization like Human Rights Watch to make us aware here in the global north of what is happening in the majority world, of the issues that, things that we take for granted on so many levels, it seems to me. Could you talk a little bit about that? I have a friend who's an author, and he every now and then he writes a book that he refers to as like one of his medicine books that very few people buy, because they're things that people don't really want to hear about, And he's a theologian, actually, so it's interesting your comment earlier about studying philosophy and theology, and he's so. Is that what documentary films like? Are these like medicine films? Are these the films that, people need to sit down and watch, that we should make our kids watch, that we should be watching more of? I mean, how do you get people into these theaters in the first place? Because I think you guys are so right. And it's so important, the work that's being done. And Nick, I'm so glad you mentioned the challenges these 5 filmmakers would have made. And by the way, is it Alakala, I Am Samuel, Wake Up on Mars, Love Child, and Maxima, I believe, are the 5 films that are being featured. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, there's about 14 questions, I think, embedded there, by the way. So you can pick any one of those ones that you'd like to riff on. But yeah, ethics of engagement. How do you get people excited about this stuff? How do you get people engaged? I guess we're talking about public engagement here, aren't we?
Well, in a way, it works on a number of levels, the ethics of engagement. And as I said, each one of these films is an example to me of an ethics of engagement that works between filmmakers and subjects, because if there is not, as I said before, there's an arrogance about taking a camera and assuming that you can just sort of tell a story about other people. And unless you have a commitment to being a conduit in some way for the truth of that situation, which requires not just humility, but really not being in control. And a lot of people want to be in control,
right?
And relinquishing control in these situations, I think, is a really important thing. And I think
and Jennifer, sorry to interrupt, but don't you have to listen really well? I mean, isn't
that's what I mean about relinquishing control. Every one of our films in the credit says this film was made without a traditional script, and we do it specifically because we don't outline everything we want and then just go try to find it. We do a ton of research, we get into a context, and then we, in that context, forget everything we've learned and just try to be there and convey the truth of that place.
So good.
And you can really tell that with all of these films that different versions of that were happening. Number one. So I would say that in the ethics of engagement between filmmaker and subject requires really careful approach and ongoing relationships. Secondly, the ethics of engagement for audiences. These are not medicine films. These are films that are deeply inspiring. And I think if COVID and the pandemic and the past year and American politics this past year especially has taught us anything, it is that we are living in a world where inequalities are becoming more and more revealed. And people are, I think, aware of their own place in these global inequalities, and also the capacity that they have to do something to change them, the incredible generosity that we have seen with people helping other people in this pandemic. And I think that these films are inspiring because they give us a true empathetic understanding of what other people are going through, but it also allows us to reflect on our own situations and what makes us the same. Going back to Kant, the universal, that there are elements that unite us, and
and similarity through difference, right? Which is something we just seem to. We don't even take it for granted, because I'm not even sure we're really talking about it.
No. Well, look at what was happening in the States. That was difference for difference, and I really think that when we reach these points of connection, those are little miracles, and that is why these films are not medicine. These films are, they're uplifting and galvanizing
So
and
good.
educational at the same time, you know?
Yeah, it's so good. And I love the fact that the festival this year is free. It's just, I trust that it's going to make it so much more accessible. And I often will say to documentarians, you know, I hope everyone gets to see this film. And I feel the same way. I'm looking forward to seeing some of these. Nick, I love that you as the DOP has to sort of rein Jennifer in from time to time. I find that really interesting. You're very much the visual storyteller as well, but your producer hat on as your pencils you're on your ear, and it's probably very sharp. Um, any thoughts for people who are going? I mean, I've interviewed folks, who have made films on S9s and iPhones. Anything encouraging, affirming from a producer's perspective that you can say to Canadians or filmmakers around the world that, you know what, pick up the phone. I mean, you want to talk about ethics of engagement. It's time for you to start telling a story or the story or maybe your story.
I think you raise a really good point. And in the trajectory of my career, the dynamics of who gets to make a film have been hugely transformed. And it's a technological revolution, and it's much more democratized because of what you're saying. The means of production are now available to a much broader swath of people in lots of places around the world. Just with smaller, cheaper cameras. And like you say, your phone can be a tool for making a powerful film or for capturing a scene you wouldn't otherwise be able to capture. And that has an incredible influence on the kind of films that get made. Unfortunately, the flip side of that, as we've seen in the great sort of promise of the global commons of the internet and that best possible outcome,
right,
the reality doesn't always deliver on that utopia. And we see an enormous concentration of power on the internet, where the big FANG companies actually have a gravitational mass and actually gather up so much of the power of what does get seen through the power of search and everything. I think it's a really nice moment to highlight the importance of the film festival. There are so many films out there. It's such a noisy marketplace. Like you say, you could on any night, on YouTube with all of our channels, there's so many choices to make. I think we're all grateful for acts of trusted curation. And that's what a film festival is. It's an organization of people whose job is to try and look at all of the possible films and put some together with some coherence, some context, and some background in a way of, to help people make those decisions. And I think, we're honored to have been part of the team to do that this year. It's not obviously what we normally do, but we've been big supporters of Human Rights Watch, the organization, for a long time, and we've made their 10th anniversary film and things like that. So been engaged and know about their work. And obviously, Jennifer's involved with the Toronto International Film Festival. I'm involved being on the board of the Hot Docs Film Festival. We were really lucky in this country to have some wonderful festivals. And then also, in our role here with Human Rights Watch, being able to take some of the lessons learned in the pandemic of how to try and quickly shift everything that's good about a film festival to a virtual world. So the Human Rights Watch Film Festival is actually partnered with Hot Docs in this case, and we're using their streaming platform. So as Jennifer said, it's great that you don't have to come to the Bloor Cinema or one of the cinemas on a specific night now to see the film or race for tickets necessarily, because they're open, they're free, and tickets are open all to anyone across Canada. It's geo-blocked to Canada to be able to see these films. And you also have some leeway in terms of when you're going to see them. So we've tried to focus some attention on the opening night on February 18th for A La Calle, and there will be a moderated discussion after the film that night to try and get some of that wonderful buzz that a film festival can have. But then after that point, that film and all the others if you sign up and get your ticket for free, you'll be able to watch it at your leisure over a window of time. So there should be fewer impediments to really watching the films from this lineup that you want to see. And I think that's a big success under the circumstances. And of course, something's lost that we can't gather in person, but so much is gained too from the virtual platform.
It's so good. And I know, listen, I, without a doubt, could spend most of the rest of the afternoon and into early evening chatting with you both. And I know that you probably would love to do the same, but you've got other things on your plate, and that's exciting too. And I've had such a great time chatting with you today. I hope we get to do a part 2 down the road, and maybe even a face-to-face. I've been working at TIFF for quite a few years now as well. And I just so love what you guys do. I mean, as Roger Ebert, empathy making machines. I mean, I truly believe, what Thomas King says, all we got are stories. That's all we got. And we got to keep telling them, and we got to keep telling them in beautiful ways. So I hope you guys both continue to push those boundaries. And I'm going to hold you to account. And hey, Jennifer, I got to say, I don't think this will be my 548th published interview. And I don't think I've ever spoken about the categorical imperative before. So that's a thumbs up from my perspective.
It was great talking, and we're really excited about
So Feb 18th to 22nd, hrw.org/Canada, I believe. And then, of course, we can also get to it through the Hot Docs website, hotdocscinema.ca. Search Human Rights Watch Film Festival. Thanks to you both, Nick Depensier and Jennifer Bachwell, here with us today. Celebrated filmmakers in their own right, but today talking about other things that matter as well. Thanks so much for joining me today on Face to Face.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, David. Great to talk.
Take care.